Okay, so today's March 11th, and it's daylight savings time. So, which is why we're a little bit late this morning. Um, I did look at my phone, but I also looked at my watch, and my watch is behind, so I got kind of mixed up there. So today's talk is going to be on finding balance in the midst of fear. I think it's a very important topic, and I think most people can relate to it in different ways. You know, for me, lately, it's been something that's come up quite a bit. First, as a therapist, working with seeing clients that were affected by what happened in Parkland, and it kind of has a ripple effect. So it doesn't just touch the families directly, but it touches everybody around in the community. And even I was talking to a first responder who said they've been getting letters from Alaska, like praising the Coral Springs Police Department for how they responded to that crisis. Because they got their first responders there as quickly as possible. There were a lot of balls dropped, but
Right.
the way the Coral Springs, department did it. But just a terrible tragedy, and it brings up, there's a way in which when something like that happens, the anxiety level goes up I think for everyone, you know. So for the kids going into the schools, the teachers that are there and are responsible for protecting them, the parents who are dropping those kids off, and anybody that, it's kind of like that 6th degree of separation, that in some way we're all connected. So, so life is an ebb and flow where everything around us and within us is constantly in flux. That kind of goes along with it, right? When we meditate, we're actually witnessing this process of the ebb and flow. And it's at times really challenging, just as in daily life. Some days are, there's nothing happening, and sometimes there's a sense of peace. Sometimes there's nothing happening, but in your mind, everything's happening. So then it's a state of chaos. And then sometimes it's chaotic out here, and we're able to maintain our balance. And so it's all, all the conditions are changing. And if we're honest with ourselves, we'll admit that when the changes are pleasant, we want it to stay that way. And when it's unpleasant, we want it to change. There's both a biological, emotional, and mental reason for this tendency to cling to the pleasant or push away the unpleasant. I think underlying it all is the fear. So I listed some fears. I'm going to start with fear of being late, because that was us this morning. Fear of the unknown, fear of failure, fear of not being good enough, fear of not being liked, fear of disconnection, fear of not being loved, fear of physical pain, fear of loss, fear of death, fear of life, fear of fill in the blank, because for everyone it's different. Maybe some of these touched on things that you felt, but there's so many different fears. So it really doesn't matter what you're afraid of, it's what happens when that fear rises. And it's out of fear that the 3 poisons the Buddha spoke of arise. So the 3 poisons are greed, hatred, and delusion. You don't have to think very hard or long to find examples of this in your own personal life. They're all contained in the above incomplete list of fears. So what does this mean? Does it mean that fear is a bad thing? That is something we need to try and eliminate? Is that even possible? No, it's not. It is at times essential to our well-being. In times of danger, whether physical, emotional, or mental, it's a signal we need to pay attention to investigate it wisely. That's the key. Fear itself isn't a problem. It's what's helped us survive. It's more about how we meet the fear when it arises. I was reading Shinzen Young's formula for suffering. Anyone familiar with that? No? Okay. It's very much in line with what we're talking about. The formula is suffering equals pain times resistance. Suffering equals pain times resistance. Does it make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm. The resistance itself is what creates the suffering. And the suffering's created by our reaction to the pain. We don't usually meet it with open arms. At least I know I don't. We try to get it to go away. We conceptualize, philosophize, rationalize, intellectualize. Numb out with drugs, alcohol, food, internet, worrying, etc. We try everything in our toolbox to manage it, manipulate it, bargain with it. Think about it. Think about the last time you experienced some form of fear. So just pausing and really connecting. So I invite you to kind of, as you listen, check in. Reflect back on a time that you felt some form of fear. And could you feel the resistance in your body? How the mind contracts when there's fear in the space. And what happens to the heart. So there's usually the mind kind of shuts down, gets tight. And the heart gets closed off. And it's all in preparation for defending ourselves, trying to keep ourselves safe. But as you know, when you do that, what happens is that we withdraw, we isolate ourselves. And in that moment, it feels like we're alone, right? We lose our connection to each other. We lose our connection to compassion. We lose our connection to wisdom. And we're caught up in pure reactivity. There may be some, I mean, if you've meditated for some time, then there may be some awareness of what's happening. But depending on what is happening, sometimes even if we've been meditating, we're still going to get thrown by it, right? So first of all, it's important to say that our way of meeting fear, the reactivity that follows any sense of fear, isn't our fault. This is really essential to take that in. Because so many times what happens is fear arises, we react, and then what follows is the judgment, the criticism, the self-criticism, or the blaming, or the shaming, or all the things we do when things aren't going the way we want them to. Can you relate to that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's the suffering. That's the layer of suffering. We're already in pain, and then, it's like I say, we have an open wound, and we take a handful of salt and we pour it in there. We don't know we're doing it. It's habit. It's the conditioning, right? It's not our fault. Sometimes it comes from the past. It comes from when I say conditioning, when, if you read any books on Buddhism or mindfulness, you'll see that a lot of our patterns and our habits, they come from conditioning, and it comes from growing up in a society where the intention is to help us to live and survive in the society and to be successful and all the other things, happy, you name it. So it's all with the intention of helping us. But a lot of times what's being passed on to us are patterns from other people who were also trying to survive. So if you can look at it through that lens, that's the start of compassion. Can you see that? Yeah. So this is a quote from the Buddha. Well, even before getting to that quote, just following up on what I was saying, that, the first step is to notice if you're blaming yourself or in some way getting down on yourself, and you'll feel it in your body when that's happening. And not make yourself wrong for that, not try to get rid of that, because that's what we try to do. So there's the pain of whatever it is, of the moment, of not connecting, of not being understood, of not getting what you want. And then what follows that, I'm ungrateful, or whatever it is you're telling yourself, there's the suffering. And then to feel that in your body, because it's not all here. This is the place we go to. But we have a body, we have a heart, and we have a mind. And they're all connected. So whatever affects one part affects all the others. But a lot of times our attention is here. So the way we meet experience determines the outcome. Shame yourself, and reactivity is sure to follow. Meet reactivity with compassion, and it shifts. And I was listening to a talk by Jill Shepard. She was talking about the two wings of mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom. And in her talk, she was reading from, I don't know if you've heard of Brene Brown, but I think she's a sociologist. She's done a lot of work on shame and perfectionism. And one of the things she talks about is, she gives an example of how if you put shame in a petri dish, all you need are three things for it to grow. Now let me see if I can remember what the three things are. Silence, judgment. I don't remember what the third one was. And what she was saying is this feeling of inadequacy that arises, the feeling of there's something wrong with me, and then the silence, meaning the keeping it inside and not sharing it, like not sharing your story with anyone, just keeping it inside becomes really toxic. I'll look up what the third one is, and I'll let you know what that is next week.
Isn't it fear?
No. What she was saying is that when you take the same petri dish and you put shame in the petri dish and you add empathy or compassion, then shame doesn't grow. So there's the need for us to remember our connection to each other, to remember that other people suffer, and also to share our story. That was one of the most important things she said, that we have to be able to to share it with someone who can, in their way of responding, be able to say, I see you and you're not alone. That's really, really important. It goes against what we normally try to do when shame arises. And there's fear. Underlying that is fear, right? Yeah. And then she also said that Brene quoted Pema Chodron when Pema says that it takes courage to sit in the dark with others who are also suffering. That Brene was saying that a lot of times people think that vulnerability, which is also what's being asked of you when shame arises, vulnerability is a weakness. Have you heard that before?
The three things are silence, secrecy, and judgment.
Yeah. Secrecy, yeah.
Brene Brown.
Yeah. She's done TED Talks on this, so you can look her up. They're great. I don't know if you've heard her.
Yeah, I actually came across one the other day.
Yeah.
I watched her one on shame.
Yeah.
I don't think she used a petri dish.
No, this was in an interview, I think. But it was great.
And the same concept, the success of 12-step programs is bringing people share things that you think, okay, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one.
Yeah, right, yeah. So
someone actually said that in front of everyone.
Yeah, so that goes, yeah. So there it is. That goes against the secrecy, right? Yeah. Keeping it inside, the silence, the judgment. So when we kind of shut down and withdraw, we're sitting. It's like sitting in a dark room by yourself and, with all your negative thoughts and all what you think are your flaws and your stories. You're just sitting in that room by yourself, and it's pretty toxic. So when we bring, I think of that visual, like the two petri dishes, and one is, just the silence and the secrecy and the judgment. And the other one is doused with empathy or compassion, the power of that compassion, to be able, that's like the antidote, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also want to tie it back to the three poisons that the Buddha talked about, because you can hear it, the greed, that sometimes the greed is, if you think about greed, it's like really shutting down and tight. And not enough. In some way, it's not enough money, not enough, whatever it is, I don't have enough of here, that people are going to look down on me, or whatever it is, right? That's part of it. Or I got to hang on to all the material things that I have. So it comes in many, many different shades. The greed, the ill will or hatred, that all comes out of fear, the hatred, and then the delusion that things can stay the same, or that I'll finally get to a place where I'll be accepted by everybody, or I'll have enough, whatever enough looks like. So, but it's coming from a feeling of a lack of, right? Comparison and all those things. Can you all relate to this? Yeah. So this is a quote from the Buddha. At least I'll say I think it's the Buddha. The thought manifests as the word. The word manifests as the deed. The deed develops into habit, and the habit hardens into character. So watch the thought and its way with care, and let it spring from love. born out of concern for all beings. And that includes yourself. So it comes from this wellspring of love, right? And I believe that that love is grounded in compassion and grounded in wisdom. The words above echo what the Buddha said more than 2,500 years ago. We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The truth of this verse is timeless. It is truth whether for the past, the present, or the future. And another quote that I really love from Rilke that speaks to this need to meet our painful experiences with an intention of responding with compassion and wisdom. So he says, how should we be able to forget those ancient myths that at the beginning of all peoples, the myths about dragons that at the last moment turn into princes? Perhaps all the dragons of our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us once beautiful and brave. Perhaps everything terrible is in its depth, in its deepest being, something helpless that wants help from us. So you must not be frightened if a sadness rises up before you larger than any you have ever seen. If a restiveness like light and cloud shadows passes over your hands and over all you do. You must think that something is happening with you, that life has not forgotten you, that it holds you in its hand. It will not let you fall. Why do you want to shut out of your life any uneasiness, any miseries, or any depressions? For after all, you do not know what work these conditions are doing inside you. Beautiful words. Very hard to put into play, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I think of the glass blower and, you know, how the fire creates this piece of work of art. Yeah. And that it has to go through the fire in order for it to come out and be what it is. You know, sometimes you'll look at these pieces, it's exquisite. And I think of the pain that sometimes we hold, and it's not so much the pain itself, it's how we're holding it. Sometimes we just we give it away. We give it out to others, you know, because we don't want it. And then that creates more suffering, right? And sometimes we internalize it. We turn towards ourselves. That still has an effect on everyone around us as well, and a deep effect here. So exploring this a little further, I know that I've talked about the Buddha's story of the 2 arrows. Remember that? Yeah. So this is from Tara Brock's book on the True Refuges. And even if you've heard this story before, I'd say to listen with a beginner's mind, because I every time I read the story, it lands in a different way. The Buddha once asked a student, if a person is struck by an arrow, is it painful? The student replied, it is. The Buddha then asked, if the person is struck by a second arrow, is that even more painful? And the student replied again, it is. The Buddha then explained, in life, we cannot always control the first arrow. However, the second arrow is our reaction to the first. And with this second arrow comes the possibility of choice. The first arrow is our human conditioning to cling to comfort and pleasure and to react with anger or fear to unpleasant experience. It's humbling to discover that willpower is often no match for these primal energies. I think that statement is so important because in some way we try to will away what's here and it doesn't work. We believe we should be able to control our negative emotions. So right there, it starts by labeling them negative, like they're not supposed to be there. Then they just storm in and possess our psyches. We think we should be able to stop our obsessive thoughts or compulsive behaviors, but the anxious rehearsing, the cravings for food or attention hound us throughout the day. This isn't the Buddha talking, this is Tara, just in case. The second, more painful arrow is our reaction to these failures. Sometimes our self-aversion is subtle. We're not aware of how it undermines us. Yet often it is not. We hate ourselves for the way we get insecure and flustered, for being fatigued and unproductive, for our addiction to alcohol or other substances. Rather than attending to the difficult and sometimes trauma-based emotions underlying the first arrow, we shoot ourselves with the second arrow of self-blame. Awakening self-compassion is often the greatest challenge people face on the spiritual path. And again, this was, I think this was Kristen Neff who they were doing studies on what makes it hard to bring self-compassion to suffering. And a lot of people thought, some of the people that they interviewed thought it would make them weaker. So they relied more on self-criticism. Does that make sense? Yeah, can you relate to that? And if you can't, think about how the self-criticism is tied to the self-defense, to the defense system. It's meant to keep you alive. So bringing in Rick Hansen, who does this beautiful job of talking about the reactive brain, and he talks about carrots and sticks. And what he means by that, he talks about way back when our ancestors were out there on the savannah, the difference between a carrot and stick was life and death. So if you couldn't get food, the carrot, it was okay because you could always try to get it the next day. But if you didn't see the stick or the tiger, then whap, you were gone. You couldn't, that's it. The end of your life, right? So he talks about now in our present, not in our present, but going way, way back. We've evolved, right? We like to think we've evolved. But sometimes we're reacting to things, and he calls them paper tigers. We react to things as if they're real tigers, like it's a real life and death threat. But it's not. And that's what creates the suffering. And it has a lot to do, there's a lot more. So if you study attachment, you'll see that it comes from that as well, meaning that when we were born, we were fully 100% dependent on our mothers and our fathers, right? But more on mom to keep us alive. And if that didn't happen, then we grow up with feeling insecure, feeling scared, anxious, depressed. I mean, so many different things that come out of that. So it doesn't stop when you become a grown-up, right? It continues because our need for connection is hardwired. So can you see how it comes from different places? It's not just about survival. It's complicated. Yeah. So when we begin to investigate, we begin to discover that the deepest pain sometimes is in how we're feeling about ourselves. And think about the last time that you got reactive. Maybe your attention was turned outward, but who was at the center of the story? You, right? Something was happening to you, somebody was doing something to you, or whatever it is. And in that moment, when we take things personally, we suffer. And all of us do it. And again, not our fault. Because if you go to a place of fault, then you have nowhere to go. And it just perpetuates the cycle of shame, right? Get it to go away. Finally, it kind of, okay, it eases off. You've done whatever it is you're used to doing to get it to go away. And then when something happens, another trigger, somebody says something, or you think something, or something happens in the world, it all gets triggered all over again. And that's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Yeah. Yet it's what we do. And I laugh not because it's funny, but it's ironic, that we keep using the same thing. It's almost like we have a hammer and we use it for everything. And in a sense, it is, we're trying to help ourselves. It's really, really important to see that. Because even having compassion towards that part that's doing the criticizing, the shaming, the blaming, all of that, that's the beginning of bringing that compassion to that petri dish, right? Yeah. And it's also the beginning of reconnecting with the wider world, not just the world that's here, but, with the world around you. So going further with what Tara says. So when we're addicted to the message of the second arrow, I'm basically not okay, we become harsh and unforgiving towards ourselves. We're attempting to vanquish our weaknesses and change ourselves for the better, yet the effect is to reconfirm our conviction that we are intrinsically flawed. That coarse sense of badness then primes the next round of aggression, defensiveness, or paralysis that sustains our suffering. Attacking ourselves is a painful, false refuge. The good news is that we do have some choice about the second arrow. We can stop attacking ourselves for how we are feeling, thinking, and acting. We can learn to recognize when we are at war with ourselves and decide to pause and deepen our attention. we can allow ourselves to enter the gateway of love. This pausing is an essential part of reconnecting with what helps us to be present with what's arising. It is in the pausing that we can begin to turn towards the suffering. Acceptance of what's happening is the first step. This acceptance goes beyond our cognitive mind, beyond our thoughts. We connect with what is happening in our body. Our body's in the present and is directly affected by what we carry in our minds. This is why meditation begins with the body, the breath, and the heart. So that's my talk for today. So can you relate to this? Yeah. Any comments? Questions?
It's a tough topic to comment about. It's a tough topic to comment about.
Oh, it's a tough topic to comment about. Yeah.
A lot to take in.
Yeah. Can you hear the good news in it, though?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The universality, that we're not alone.
Yeah.
In those feelings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the universality. Yeah.
Reach
that
out.
Others.
Reach out.
Reaching out is really important. Yeah. I think it's, it's the reality is that there's times when we get caught in our beliefs or our stories, even if we've been meditating for a long time. And then, so I kind of get that it's hard. It's a big topic, and there's the topic of shame itself, right? So self-disclosure and kind of letting it all out there, like you were saying, Tim, that. But I think that same tendency towards shame, which keeps us stuck, and then the process of actually speaking out frees us.
Right.
So I mean, I've been meditating for a long time, and recently we've been going through a lot of different changes, moving from one place to another. Like I said, talking to clients who've been affected by what happened, and that itself, kind of trying to help, but also it touches here, and people I love struggling at times, and not wanting them to struggle, sometimes going into trying to fix that, which is not my job. But it comes out of that not wanting, to see others in pain, which is, I'm a therapist, right? So this is what I deal with on a daily basis. But of course, when it's close to home, it's really challenging. So sometimes it's the not wanting, kind of being in that space of not wanting what's here, and the watching that tendency to try to in some way fix it, even if it's just like sitting on my mat and starting to, practice metta, but with the intention of getting rid of something. So, you got to watch the mind, because it's kind of crafty, and there can be kind of an underlying motive there. So even seeing that there's fear there, right? Because they're not wanting to sit with whatever it is. It's kind of filled with fear. And so then the practice becomes one of just opening to that and noticing what fear feels like. So it's turning the attention from out here to this way. Does that make sense? Yeah. And what is hard is the fear of letting go. And this practice very much is one of letting go. If you think about it, it's letting go of doing, letting go of, trying to fix or manipulate or whatever it is that we do. And it's just being with whatever's here. So then it becomes one of, I remember Gil Fronsdale saying that when you have any kind of afflictive emotion or any kind of emotion that's kind of rocks you, he talked about just having your hands like this and imagine you're holding those feelings, with open hands. You're not gripping, you're not pushing, you're just receptive to what's here. And that in itself, this kind of is symbolic of compassion. Yeah. So we're going to meditate. So even setting up your posture can be an act of compassion, really tuning into your body, responding, shifting, and finding that way to sit where there's a sense of groundedness, wakefulness, keeping the spine nice and tall, your head squarely over the shoulders, chin slightly tilted downwards. And your eyes can be closed or slightly, the eyes can look downcast towards the cheeks, whatever feels most comfortable for you. And you might shift around a bit until you find that point of balance. Start by feeling the sensation of your body in contact with the floor. Perhaps if you're sitting in a chair, feeling your feet on the ground, the contact between your body and the chair, perhaps the contact of your body against another part of your body. If on the floor, feeling your hips, your buttocks against the cushion, relaxing the knees, keeping the spine nice and tall, shoulders slightly back, chest open. So first finding that alert, dignified posture. And then feeling the sensation of the breath coming into the body through the nostrils, into the chest, the lungs, the belly, and then out again, slowly releasing that breath, letting go with the out breath. A breath in a breath out. So as you continue to breathe, arriving here in this space, feeling the space within you, the space around you, just allowing everything to be as it is, whatever's here. And then gently shifting your focus to the sensations in the body. Notice the changing flow of sensation. Sensation of the breath entering the body, creating space, flowing out. Sensations within the body, vibration, swirling, pulsing. Just opening to what's here, present. The aliveness right here in the body, the heart and the mind. And then shifting to notice the energy in the mind without any judgment, just awareness of the energy in the mind. Perhaps there's agitation, dullness, a sense of calm or peace, restlessness or lethargic. So there's the breath flowing in through the nostrils, chest, and belly, and then flowing out, releasing. There's the bodily sensations, shifting, changing, appearing, and disappearing. And now bring your attention to your heart region. And if you wish, you can place your hand over your heart. Find your breath in the heart region, beginning to practice mindfulness of breathing. Feel your chest move as you breathe. When your mind wanders, bring it gently back to the sensation of the breath. And then after a few minutes, release your attention to your breath and let yourself recall a difficult emotion. If you wish, remember the situation in which you felt the emotion. And begin to expand your awareness to your body as a whole. While you recall the emotion, scan your body for where you feel it the most. In your mind's eye, sweep your body from head to toe, stopping where you can sense a little tension or discomfort. And now choose a single location in your body where the feeling expresses itself most strongly. In your mind, incline gently toward that spot, continuing to breathe naturally while allowing the sensation to be there, just as it is. Allow the gentle rhythmic motion of the breath to soothe your body. If you become overwhelmed by an emotion, stay with your breath until you feel better, and then return to the emotion. You might use the image I spoke of with the hands open, holding whatever it is, with the willingness to stay present. Holding it with compassion, with acceptance. Notice when you're getting caught in a story and gently shift your attention back to that part of the body that holds the emotion. The intention is just to be present with that. And then listening to the words of Rumi on this practice of cultivating wisdom and compassion for all that arises. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. They may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. May this practice serve to awaken our hearts and minds and those of all beings everywhere. Thank you for your kind attention. Namaste.